Oh, it's so lovely to be back at Holy Trinity, my favourite church. If I lived in Calgary, this is where I would worship. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Reverend Andy Lees. Most of my ordained service was not in the church. I was employed by Alberta Health Services in the Spiritual Cares Department in Calgary. I'm retired. I'm now a volunteer at the Foothills Hospital in Okotoks, and I'm also priest in charge of Christ Church Fort Macleod, which means a lot of driving. And I do all this from Turner Valley. So if you want advice on how to make your life complicated, I'm your man. Anyway, to the issue in hand. Today's story from Luke's Gospel appears on the surface to be one of Jesus' more straightforward parables. One man approaches Jesus and asks the Lord to urge the man's older brother to share the family inheritance. Today that might seem a reasonable request, but then it was a bombshell. We know from the Hebrew law active at the time that the eldest son inherited the whole of the family fortune. We see that in the parable of the prodigal son. So this request is from a young man trying to trap Jesus between issues of law and justice. Well, it's impossible to trap Jesus. He, in fact, ignores the trap. He points out that he, Jesus, isn't a lawyer or a judge, so he has no authority to arbitrate on the issue. But then he goes straight to the core of the matter with a story that illustrates the true darkness of heart on display here. Jesus tells the devious brother a story about a rich fool, too focused on his possessions to appreciate the true value of life. Here's a contemporary update on the parable. An investigative reporter asked a young Wall Street broker on the fast track to success what his chief goal in life was. "To make my first million by the time I'm 28, was the reply. "Then what?" the reporter continued. "Well, I suppose I'd like to become a multimillionaire or a billionaire." The newsman pressed on. "Then what?" Beginning to get a little irritated, the broker said, well, I want to have a family. I'd like to retire when I'm 40, or I'd like to travel around the world. Do you see the next question coming? Then what? Exasperated, the would-be billionaire said, "Well, like everyone else, I guess someday I'll die." The young stockbroker's last answer again begs the question, then what? Makes you think, eh? Like the rich man in Jesus' story, the difficulty with the young broker was not that he desired to have possessions. It was that his possessions had a hold on him. He was possessed by possessions. Jesus' warning is strong. Says Jesus, "Watch closely. Be on your guard. When your desire for things gets its claws into your life, it can lead down a very dangerous road." And yet, we tend to pass this parable by because we do not think we are rich in the world's terms. But this parable isn't about riches. It's about possessions. So it can and does apply to us because we can all be possessed by our job, by our looks, by our house, by anything. We can all be obsessed with the obsession of getting a bigger, better, newer, or different, whatever it is. But such obsession can only ultimately be destructive. First, it can destroy our relationships. This gospel story suggests quite clearly that the young brother's desire to grab a share of an inheritance he is not entitled to is destroying his relationship with his brother. And in our lives too, over-concentration on material gain can cause us to be neglectful of the loved ones around us. I've seen it personally. In my role as a chaplain at the Calgary Foothills Hospital, I was there for 20 years, I've seen seemingly happy families disintegrate at the bedside of their newly deceased loved one. One incident remains vividly in my mind. I was involved with introducing a program designed to persuade patients to make a personal directive to cover the event of their sudden, serious illness or death. It was quite a hard sell, except to one woman, a dialysis patient, who jumped at the chance. When I asked her why she was so keen, she told me a remarkable story. She was the eldest of 7 siblings. When her father was close to death, he told her he had left everything to her because she was the most sensible of the 7 and could be trusted to disperse the estate fairly. She assumed her father had told the others, but he hadn't. And somehow all the other 6 had heard that she was getting everything, and at her father's deathbed the youngest brother lunged at her and struck her with an umbrella because he was so angry that she was getting the lot. And from the day of the incident, she said she felt a distance from her younger brother. No wonder that woman wanted to embrace the advanced planning personal directive. But secondly, as well as destroying relationships, being possessed by possessions can also destroy life's meaning. Failing to achieve life's goals can be catastrophic. Another story will suffice. It's about a British Army warrant officer. Let's call him Sergeant Major Smith, not his real name. And he retired from the army. I knew him vaguely, but when I was talking to another warrant officer I had served with, he asked me if I had heard what had happened to Sergeant Major Smith. Well, I hadn't. Apparently, according to my army acquaintance, Sergeant Major Smith had left the army and settled into a lovely house on a beautiful estate in Reading, which is about 40 miles west of London. He was happy there until a new and grander estate was built across the road from him. These houses had 2 driveways, so one could drive in, motor up to the front door, and leave by the second driveway. And what got into Sergeant Major Smith's brain was that the person in the new house opposite to his had bought a new yellow Lamborghini sports car. And Sergeant Major Smith began to obsess about owning one too, until it took control of him. So, without telling his wife, he took out a second mortgage and ordered a new yellow Lamborghini from a luxury car dealer in London. All the finance and insurance and registration were in place, and he was due to pick up the car on the following Saturday. When he got a confirmatory call from the dealer 2 days earlier that the car was ready, he decided to go up next day on Friday to pick it up. He just couldn't wait. He took the train to London and picked up the car. On his way home on the M4 motorway, he lost control of the car and crashed. The car was a total write-off, and he ended up with months in hospital. The real problem, though, was that the car was insured for pickup on Saturday, but he had rushed into London, picked up the car, and crashed it on Friday when it was not yet insured. He lost not just the car, he lost his house, his wife, his kids, his health. He was left with nothing, not even, I suspect, the will to live. That's what being possessed by possessions can do to a person. The parable really is a warning to all of us and a call to take stock of what is important in our lives. And what is important in our lives is not our possessions. The most important things in life are, well, it's contained in a phrase I use a lot to keep my life focused on what's important. The most important things in life are not things. Yet I believe our society has got it so wrong now. People were created to be loved. Things were created to be used. I sense we've got it the wrong way round now. The world is in chaos now because things are being loved, greed reigns supreme, and people are being used and left with no hope. So I repeat again, the most important things in life are not things. The most important things in life are relationships. The fact that in today's parable a focus on things, in this case money, a focus on things is ruining the relationship between two brothers, shows this to be true. Most important in our lives are our relationships with God, with our family, with our friends, with our community. That is what Jesus is pointing to. By coincidence, or is it providence, I've just finished a book called Between the Dark and the Daylight by Sister Joan Chittister, who's a Benedictine nun. She has remarkable insights into the ills of modern society, and she writes this about possessions. The price we pay for the accumulation of things is a high one. For the rest of our lives, we are condemned to fear the loss of them and to live forever with the taste of insecurity in our mouths, unending neediness in our hearts, and the inability of soul to enjoy what we have and be grateful for what we love. The things of the soul, the joy of life, the love of beauty, the gift of friendship, the integration with nature, the pursuit of truth, and the depth of spirit. These grow in open land, bare of the baubles of life, free of frenzy, and devoid of the chaos of accumulation. Then we are rich. Then no one can take anything away from us because we've already relinquished it. Or as the philosopher Epictetus wrote, wealth consists in not having great possessions, but rather in having few wants. I think that's a great quote to end an already marvelous quote. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but rather in having few wants. So there's the invitation. It's loud and clear. Jesus, through the gospel story, invites us to examine our priorities and urges us not to be possessed by possessions. This week, then, I invite you to be intentional. Take time out to reassess the priorities of life. And if the result surprises you, well, rejoice. Rejoice that God has nudged you, prompted you, and above all blessed you with a new and greater vision, a vision perhaps based no longer on possessions, but on people, on relationships, and above all on Jesus Christ. That would be a great blessing indeed. Amen.